from assigning pronouns that differ from a student's biological sex. This America is a direct result of falsehoods and deceit. Florida refuses to accept the deceptive narratives perpetrated by trans activists. The state has taken a strong stance, leaving no room for ambiguity. Will these activists continue their falsehoods? Certainly. Will they achieve progress in other states? Probably. Will they achieve their goals in Florida? Absolutely not. And welcome to the broadcast as we discuss the border crisis with former member of Congress, Tim Murphy. Welcome back to the broadcast, and thank you so much for joining us. And Scott Powell, author and entrepreneur. You know, the reality, Congressman Murphy, is that despite all the recent media attention on what the expiration of Title 42, what it means for the humanitarian crisis on the United States side of the border, the real calamity is unfolding in Mexico. Immigration might well become the central issue for the next 10 or 15 years, because unless we resolve the issue on the side of the Mexican border, nothing is going to change in the long term, Congressman Murphy.
Well, when we look at what's happening just in the last 3 years at the southern border, 5.8 million contacts with Border Patrol and enforcement agencies with people coming across the border. Of that, we don't know how many more million have crossed. And what is interesting and tragic is people who come through there, let's say they've come from terrible environments of violence and drug abuse and poverty, but then their journey to our border, where with coyotes and drug lords, charging them basically their life savings, high incidences of abuse among children and women. They come over here, and what we have, and this is according to government agencies, say this, a very high incidence of depression, of anxiety, of post-traumatic stress disorder, of drug abuse, and of suicide. What we have in the United States is a system that can't handle what we have now, and a system that saw a doubling of depression and anxiety rates, huge increase in suicide, huge increases in drug overdose and drug overdose deaths during COVID. A system that was broken, a system that was further strained by post-COVID. And now when we look at these people coming through across the nation, certainly our hearts go out to people who are immigrants, but we're overloading now charitable organizations, and what little there is of some of the mental health system cannot handle this. We're making a bad problem even worse by this without real solutions.
You know, what about the myth, Scott Powell, that the numbers are drastically decreasing since Title 42 went into effect? They're not crossing the borders, and they want to give this perception that maybe we're getting these crossings under control. And then we have Border Patrol agents telling us that thousands are slipping through the cracks because they cannot handle the mass overflow as they put their systems in place to stop the flow.
Well, look, we've had a huge influx of people since the Biden administration started, and there's no reason to believe that it's slowing down, regardless of what the news reports. Even if there was a bit of a lull, I think it can pick up again. We have an insecure border. We have an invasion of the United States. We need to call it for what it is. No nation can survive when it has no borders. No nation will survive when the majority culture gets displaced by a new culture. So we are facing an existential threat to our country right now.
So what is the impact of the Biden administration's no immigration policies in the long term? Who actually is in America? And how will this play out? You got Chinese, you got everybody coming. It's almost as if welcoming. It's like a welcoming gate that swings wide open. But who's here, Congressman Murphy, and what would be the impact?
Well, the impact is what social systems we have in place, whether they're public, state, government, county, whatever, or the charitable organizations cannot handle people. And so rather than basically feeding people, you keep breaking up the loaf of bread to tinier and tinier pieces. People who are depressed, who are struggling, unfortunately, they don't have family members to go to. They don't have communities that can support them. But this constant influx, what happens, there's this term in psychology we call anosognosia, which means you are not aware of the problem. And certainly many people with severe mental illness, they're not aware they even have a problem. But there's also a voluntary kind of blindness, and that's what's taking place here, which is really troubling. Because when people refuse to acknowledge or see that there is a problem out there, they will refuse to take the steps to help those who are struggling. So we're bringing over people who have troubles. We're not really offering them much more except come on over here. Cities are strained. Crime is strained from this too. And I see the situation as getting worse as government officials, leadership continues to say there is no problem here. It reminds me of that famous scene in Star Wars where Obi-Wan Kenobi says, these aren't the droids you're looking for, just move on. Well, we're not that dumb. We know there's a problem. And in the field of psychology, which I work in, I know it's a continued strain.
Scott, why is it so important for us to modernize our ports of entry?
To normalize our ports of entry? Well, because we are a country of immigrants. We welcome immigrants, but it has to be a managed process. We can't take in too many immigrants at any one time, and I think our other guest made that very clear. We have to have an orderly process. This idea of entry anywhere along the border doesn't work. I mean, this is chaos, and it is undermining our country. I think, though, that we need to speak about this directly in honest terms. We have enemies that want to change our country through a migration replacement migration policy. That is to say, they want to replace the dominant culture in America with new cultures. They want America to continue to move into chaos and instability because they want to take our country down.
You know, Congressman, do you think that is the ultimate goal?
Well, we hate to think that that's the situation here, but many things point to that. When you look at such things as a destruction or attitudes towards institutions such as churches, such as real free speech, where there is a forum for people to share ideas without them being censored by mass media. We are in a situation where it's hard to get facts and the truth. The idea that has been out there for centuries is if there was enough chaos, you just increase people's problems. They'll look for someone to solve their problems. And that is what we find. I mean, as I said, the increases in anxiety and depression that have occurred, particularly among adolescents and young adults, suicide is now the #1 cause of death. It didn't just come out of the air. It came because the massive stress that we know when people have faith, when they have trust in their organizations, people can handle stress. We can handle things. America has been through tough times before, through war and through darkness. We've managed that. But now people say, well, what is there out there? And we recognize this continued strain and flooding of the system with people that we cannot handle. It's just one more place where people who are trying to have stable lives, to keep jobs, to have good schools, are pushed back. And so many people are left scratching their heads and says, then what is there? And how is this being done?
Scott, why don't we use existing funding to hire child welfare, medical, and language professionals at the border? Why don't we just do the fun community-based support services and proven humane alternatives to detention? I mean, why don't we address the root causes? In Mexican cities across the border, shelters that support these migrants are overwhelmed by the number of people seeking help. This is happening in other places, including Mexico City, where authorities recently closed down a derelict encampment that nonetheless was crucial for the survival of more than 800 people. Shelters' lack of capacity to provide for all the migrants needs to explain that these terrible conditions that these migrants do face. But why don't we put sensible policies in place to address this? It's just common sense.
Well, I fully agree, and I want to commend your other guest. He articulated the problem very, very well. It really is a matter of survival for America. If we create systems to accommodate this huge influx of people, we're going to lose our country. We have to have an orderly immigration policy, which might be, in the old days, it was about 1 million people a year. I mean, we've had 6 million people crossing our border in the last 2.25 years. If this continues, we've got a very big problem on our hands. So we have to discourage people from coming to our border. We can't encourage this pattern of behavior. In our country that are dysfunctional in many ways. So we're doing no favors to these people in some ways, but we're doing a huge disfavor to the American people who are the taxpayers. We have had a system that has worked remarkably well, and I talk about this in my book, Rediscovering America, where I trace the beginning of the country based on Christian principles, really, from the Pilgrims and the Mayflower to John Winthrop and the Puritans, to the founding of the country. And of course, we're not a perfect nation. We had cast the vision of equality in the Declaration of Independence, but we really didn't realize equality until the Civil Rights Movement of the 20th century. Even after the bloody Civil War, we still had segregation and discrimination, and it wasn't until Martin Luther King, 200 years after the Declaration, did we really realize the ideal.
I think it's just obvious that our highest levels of government and business have been infiltrated by people who know exactly what they're doing, who want to bring about the demise of America. They're putting these policies in place. They've got the power in the ear to make them effective. They know exactly what they're doing. I think you're seeing the steady decline of America. I know some people can say that I'm heartless and cold. Well, let me be heartless and cold. I mean, the cost of living is far less in Central America. It's far less in Mexico. You can easily live off $1,000 a month. Why don't the United States make the investments to make sure that they stay in the land that they know, not a land that's so unfamiliar to them? One thing Trump had right was his immigration policies, and you can criticize him as much as you like, but we did not have this massive overflow of migrants and illegals coming in this country. And sometimes you got to take care of your own home before you try to take care of somebody else's. And in the days of prosperity and plenty, America shows its benevolence. We show our best like we did with the Marshall Plan. But we're not in these days now. We're about to enter a recession, and Americans are suffering. Americans should be first again, not these migrants, not these illegals. And for anybody who wants to stand up and say that you're not cold, you don't like caring, you trying to take care of your own nation, your children, and your own existence. Because 67% of Americans today, if they were to have a crisis that could cost $400, they could lose their way of life. Put America first again, not these migrants. Give America a chance. Thank you both for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams.
Under the program. Take a look. In March of 2021, Texas started Operation Lone Star. The program was meant to stop the smuggling of drugs, weapons, and people into the United States. It was launched in response to a surge in illegal immigration. The operation deployed air, ground, marine, and tactical border security assets to high-threat areas along the border. Now, 2 years after launching the program, the state released numbers on the operation's success a few days ago. The effort has led to more than 394,000 illegal immigrant apprehensions and more than 31,000 criminal arrests, with reports of more than 29,000 felony charges brought. In the fight against deadly drugs pouring into the United States, Texas law enforcement seized more than 420 million lethal doses of fentanyl during the border mission. In a statement, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said, "Every individual who is apprehended or arrested and every ounce of drugs seized would have otherwise made their way into communities across Texas and the nation due to President Joe Biden's open border policies." The Biden administration previously blamed factors outside its control for the border crisis, such as crime, corruption, and poverty in countries of origin. The administration also blames former President Trump for undermining the country's asylum system, which the current administration says it's trying to fix. The new numbers also show Texas has bused nearly 30,000 illegal immigrants to a number of Democrat-led cities. Out of those, around 10,000 were bused to New York City, and another 10,000 to Washington, D.C. Texas officials previously said this serves as a wake-up call to Washington lawmakers.
5 migrants were found alive after they were abandoned by human traffickers last week in a mountain pass. The Mexican National Migration Institute says the migrants are from Colombia and Peru, and one of them is a minor. They were found by a rescue team after a 15-hour-long search in La Rumorosa Mountain Pass. It's in the Mexican state of Baja California, along the border with California. The group was found after one of them contacted Mexican authorities over the phone and reported they were abandoned by their so-called guide. The migrant also said they didn't have food or water and that a couple was traveling with their 4-year-old child who had signs of dehydration. The rescue operation ended last Wednesday, and the migrants were transferred to a shelter in Tijuana. Border officials inspect a pickup truck and find cocaine hidden in wheels of cheese. The pickup truck crossed into Texas from Mexico. The 22-year-old driver was taken into custody. Almost 18 pounds of cocaine were found in the cheese wheels. The driver told officials he was carrying cheese, but an X-ray scan showed there was something strange about it. Officials opened the cheese wheels and discovered 7 bundles of cocaine. The director of Customs and Border Protection at the Presidio port said smugglers will sometimes try to conceal contraband in items that appear innocent to deflect suspicion. Last month, officers seized 146 pounds of cocaine hidden in an ice cream maker at the El Paso border crossing. Presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. discussed his campaign for president on Fox News. He compared what he has faced to former President Trump's experience.
It's interesting to me because I've been really, slammed in a way that I think is unprecedented, even more than President Trump was slammed by the mainstream, by the corporate media.
He went on to comment on a Harvard-Harris poll that says he has the highest favorability rating of all presidential hopefuls for 2024. He said he doesn't know how people are still able to receive his message despite media censorship. He said it could be through podcasts or social media. He said he would definitely not vote for himself if he believed the news provided by the mainstream media. Kennedy commented about the poll results via Twitter. He questioned if the mainstream media would intensify the attacks against him. He suggests a new era of civil, respectful, and substantive political discourse. What's behind this Kennedy's high favorability rating, and what's the latest on his campaign? I spoke with Epoch Times reporter Jeff Louderback for an update. Jeff Louderback, thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Jeff, tell us about this new Harvard-Harris poll as it relates to RFK Jr.
Well, last month, there was a poll done that showed he had the highest favorability rating of any presidential candidate. The Harvard-Harris poll that came out July 23rd said the same thing. He has a favorability rating, I believe, of 47%. That's above President Trump and President Biden and also Ron DeSantis.
And what's behind this high favorability rating?
Well, since he announced his candidacy back in April, he's gotten support from conservatives, from liberals, from progressives, from moderates, from independents, and that seems to be continuing, even though it's been a few months into his campaign. And he appeals to a wide spectrum of people, and that's that just is in addition to the Kennedy name. It's just his stances, which, some of his stances appeal to conservatives, some appeal to Democrats.
Okay, so whenever Donald Trump takes some major political hit, like getting indicted, he seems to raise a lot of money. Are we seeing anything like that happening with RFK Jr. after all the criticism he took for his testimony in Capitol Hill?
Yeah, well, it's in different ways, and you're absolutely correct. It just galvanizes President Trump's base, and that's the same with RFK Jr. He gets chastised and criticized for his stances on vaccines. He had the hearing, July 20th on Capitol Hill, and it was a hearing about censorship, and the Democrats were trying to censor him at the hearing on censorship, and he raised quite a bit of money during the time he was doing that testimony.
And tell us about the significance of that testimony.
Well, he even discarded his written statement to defend himself against the charges of anti-Semitic comments that the New York Post reported, I believe, a week ago today. And he has vehemently denied those charges, and he talked about the hypocrisy of the criticism he got. And so that really defined his testimony.
And you're covering a few RFK Jr. events this week. Can you give us an update about what you're looking at?
Yeah, well, he has a live stream event tonight called Heal the Divide, and that's his campaign focus and being a unity candidate. And it's working so far. I mean, he's behind in the polls to President Biden, but he has support, widespread support, as I mentioned, from Republicans and Democrats and independents alike. And then tomorrow, in a previously planned event, he's speaking. It's at a Jewish facility or a Jewish center, and he has the support of the rabbi there who came out and said that RFK Jr. is not anti-Semitic. So that's just ironic that that's happening at a time when he's facing those allegations.
Jeff Louderback, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
After the break, a historic strike is looming, involving thousands of UPS workers in the nation. The current contract expires at the end of the month. Musk unveils a new X logo for Twitter. The rebrand is just the latest in a series of abrupt moves by Musk since he took over. More in just a moment, here on NTD News Today.
That we work on, as I said, both dealing with the differences and seeing if we can cooperate. That's the way we're approaching it. I think it's the responsible thing to do.
Meanwhile, Australia's Sydney Harbour welcomed the arrival of the USS Canberra. It's the first U.S. Navy ship to be commissioned in a foreign port. The USS Canberra officially joined the U.S. Navy's active fleet at a ceremony on Saturday. The combat ship is named after a Royal Australian Navy cruiser that was sunk in 1942. It was then supporting U.S. Marines landing on Guadalcanal. The U.S. ambassador to Australia said the weekend gathering was more than just a ceremony. It offered a chance to reflect on shared values between the two allies.
Protecting freedom, preserving the stability and prosperity of the rules-based order, and doing the daily work of building a more just and peaceful world. So that's what Americans and Australians have been doing together for more than 100 years.
Wherever USS Canberra is sailing, and whatever challenges her crew may face, they are ready, as reinforced by this warship's motto. And what is that?
The ceremony came amid biannual U.S.-Australia military exercise known as Talisman Sabre. The 2-week event is being held across Australia and involves simulated land battles, air battles, and amphibious landings. That's as concerns grow over Beijing's influence in the region. As tensions rise with Beijing, Taiwan held its annual air raid drills in its northern cities today. The drill is designed to practice defense against a possible invasion by communist China.
I think the war could really happen, and when it happens, the situation will be quite different from the drill. I feel that everyone is doing their best to be accommodating, so I don't know what it would be like in case war really happens.
As the sirens sounded, towns and cities, including the capital Taipei, were closed for up to half an hour. Police directed passers-by and cars to take shelter by the roadside. Residents were told to stay indoors. A series of military drills will be carried out across Taiwan this week as part of an annual military exercise. Just days ahead of the event, China sent nearly 40 warplanes towards the island. Beijing claims Taiwan is a breakaway province and has threatened to annex the island by force. That's despite never having ruled the democratic island. The Biden administration is considering new controls on the semiconductor chip industry in the tech war with China. This could have a huge impact, according to Anders Core, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and principal at Core Analytics. I spoke with him to find out more. Anders Core, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Anders, first of all, tell us about the significance of these chips.
Chips are going to power increasingly everything in the future, whether it's military technology, artificial intelligence. They're very, very important to, I mean, we see on the battlefield of Ukraine already that there's chips are being used in everything from drones to missiles.
And why is the Biden administration considering new controls and outbound investment restrictions on the chips industry?
China is increasingly belligerent. Russia is obviously belligerent in Ukraine. So the Biden administration is trying to limit the chips that these two countries and some other adversary countries receive and can use on the battlefield or elsewhere, even their economies, because it's strengthening their economy, although they don't say that.
And how could this technology be used in the battlefield?
The chips go into, for example, GPS systems, decisions. When you have loitering munitions, which are basically drones that hang out in the sky looking for a target. When they find a target, they attack. Some of these munitions don't have a person in the loop. They just have a signature that they're looking for. For example, a visual signature of a tank. When they see it, they attack.
Now, the New York Times called the potential of these controls an act of war. What do you make of that?
China's biggest exports now, more than, imports, China's biggest imports now, more than oil, are chips. So it's a very important part of China's economy. They make electronics. Chips go into everything from toasters to cars. You get hundreds of chips in some consumer electronics products. It's the future of AI, so China really needs these things. And export controls, especially when it's coordinated with countries like Japan, Netherlands, and Taiwan, will have a serious impact on China's economy and future military abilities.
And there are some companies that are lobbying against these export controls. What do you say to them?
They want to prioritize profits over national security, and I think that's ethically inappropriate when we're dealing with totalitarian and genocidal regimes like Russia and China. I think they need to see the bigger picture in terms of ethics, national security, and follow the lead of the voters, basically, the U.S. government.
And you've compared these controls to the U.S. embargo of oil on Japan before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Are we really in a 1941 type situation?
That's the concern. We could be. We don't want to risk being in a 1941 situation, although we're being forced to risk that because of China's belligerence. So we need to put controls on China, and those controls may cause a war. I mean, we have to realize that, but there's really no other way around it. We can't allow China to get stronger.
Andrew Sikora, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Strikes of the Swedish parliament. She faced charges for blocking the path of oil trucks at Malmö Harbor on June 19th. Although she admitted to defying the police order, she pleaded not guilty, saying she acted out of necessity, advocating for urgent climate action. As a result of the court's ruling,
ego terrorist
pay 1,500 Swedish crowns, or about $140 US. She had to pay about $100 more to the Crimes Victims Fund. The fine was determined based on her reported income. The maximum sentence for disobeying a police order could have been 6 months in prison. Coming up, discarded food products are often still